Okay, we're recording. All right. So at the beginning of the war, once the war starts to break out, we have to kind of once the war breaks out, we have to recognize something that I call the poetry of the war. Okay, the World War I has a certain kind of brutal, nasty poetry to it, um, and the poetry of the war is this idea that the old world is entering the war and the new world is coming out of the war. Okay, sometimes this gets described as like a birthing process, right? So birth is like a really painful, dramatic, traumatic experience, right? But from that painful, traumatic experience comes something new, right? So just like that, from this painful, traumatic experience is going to come something new. Now, these are soldiers going into the war. Now, over here, we have pictures of actual soldiers going into the war. These are illustrated drawings of the kinds of uniforms they're wearing when the soldiers enter the war. Okay. Now, we have people in their like bright uniforms. They got like their gold buttons, embroidered flowers and stuff on their uniforms, right? We literally have people carrying ceremonial swords with feathers in their hats. That is not a joke, right? I'm not exaggerating. They're like literally doing that. They also have a gun, right? But they have the sword for ceremonies, right? I'm having trouble digesting my lunch. All right, so the war starts off, and this looks like old war, right? This looks like pre-industrial war, and war in Europe looked almost like a sport for hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of years, where the soldiers would all get together and they'd all line up in a big line, and then they'd all, the trumpet blows, right? And the drums are going, right? And then the soldiers will hold up their gun and go down and they shoot, and bam, 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 right? And then they go back and then they run to the back of the line so they can reload their gun, and then they step forward, shoot, boom, 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 right? Run to the back of the line, reload again. The war was like that. War in Europe was like that for hundreds of years. And then the bugle would blow, and then they would break for lunch. Like war had lunch breaks. War had like agreed upon ending times. They'd keep fighting and then they would fight until like, 8 o'clock p.m. and then they would all stop. Right? They'd blow the bugle, people like stop for lunch, right? And the women are in the back cooking the lunch. So the soldiers all go back and eat. And then the women run out to the field and go pick up the dead bodies and pick up the bodies and drag them back. Right? Like isn't it crazy? Yeah, Sam, you're reacting correctly, right? It's crazy. It's more like a sporting match, right? This is where we get a lot of our sports from. This is where like football, rugby, soccer, right? They all come from war. They all come from like war exercises. The old world is marching into this war. Okay, these are World War I soldiers. These are Scottish soldiers. They're even wearing their war kilt, right? They got their kilt on and they are running into the war. These are Austrians here running into the war, lining up and running in. We have all of these examples of this, right? Here's Australians coming into the war. They got their Australian bush hats on. Here's the Indians. They got their nice turban on, their war turban, and they got their little flags on and stuff. What ends up happening with this war, at the beginning of the war, we have all these soldiers like lined up nicely, and they're all wearing their little hats and stuff. The problem is World War I is not an old war. World War I is a new war. It's an industrial war. This is going to lead us into the one solid iron truth that we're going to have for the rest of the year. And this iron truth is heroes don't win wars, industry wins wars. Heroes don't win wars, industries wins a war. Europe doesn't know this at the time, but the Industrial Revolution has just happened. And the Industrial Revolution is like a reset button for the human race. Your world is so different from the world of the people of the past. Your world is so radically changed. Every piece of food you've ever eaten, every time you've gone to bed, every time you've woken up, from your birth to your death, from your mother's pregnancy doctor visits all the way to your coffin. Everything in your life is different because of industry. Everything. It's basically like we're a different species. If you guys hopped in a time machine and traveled through 400 years back in time, you wouldn't even know how to talk to the people. You are that different of a person. Your species is almost a different species. I'm aware, biologically speaking, species has a meaning, right? I'm aware of the biological definition of a species, and I'm not talking about the biological definition, right? I'm talking about metaphor. Humans have hit the reset button 3 times since we've shown up on this planet. The first reset button is what made us stop being animals and start being people, somewhere around 100-ish thousand years ago. The second reset button is when we invented farming and we stopped being hunters and gatherers and started being stationary people. The third reset button is the Industrial Revolution. This is where we started letting machines do our work for us. Look at these soldiers now. These soldiers are coming into this war later on. This compared to this, it's very, very different. These soldiers almost look like today, don't they? Like they look relatively close to today. They're not wearing camouflage, but they're wearing like that olive drab color, right? And they're wearing something close to camouflage, and they've all got their helmets on, and they got everything going on. Hold on, a student just walked in my room. Hold on, get to where I can pause. I'm recording, just a second. All right, we're back. All right, but these soldiers here look like they could be today almost, right? They got the helmets, they got the boots, they look like they could almost be today. This is a direct reflection of the technology. The next line you need here is technology of World War II. That's our next letter down, which would be like what, a K, I think. Is that right?
E.
E like echo. All right. Here's our technology of the war. Artillery, machine guns, barbed wire, poison gas, tanks, planes, submarines, telegraphs, absorbent bandits. Now, Germany is an industrial country, right? Germany is home to factories. It's one of the biggest industrial centers in the world at this time period. And when Germany starts this war up, Germany is ready for this war, and Germany has invented all sorts of new weapons that they're going to use. The French line up in the war, and I think D was the introduction to the war, Fernanda. D was the poetry of the war, start of the war.
Yeah.
Okay.
Okay. So E is our technology. So as the French soldiers, they line up and they get ready and they start to march into the war, right? They start marching just like the people in this picture on the bottom here, and the French start running in towards the war, and the Germans meet the French with machine guns. Right? These are big, giant machine guns that are mounted, right? Mounted on a tripod, and the soldiers are. Okay, machine guns had been invented a while before, but Europeans hadn't seen them in action before. They had used them against like Africans, and they'd used them against like Chinese, right? And Americans had used them against Native Americans, but nobody had used them against a standing European army like this. The French didn't know what was hitting them. These machine guns are what we would say is, so next to every technology in here, you need to put like a dash and then tell me how it changed the war. So the machine gun is shooting something called a 50 caliber bullet. A 50 caliber bullet is going to be about the width of almost a quarter, not quite a quarter, like bigger than a nickel, right? And that means that when it enters your body, the entrance wound looks like to be about the size of a quarter, right? What does the exit wound look like when the bullet comes out the back? How big is it going to be? Bigger or smaller?
Smaller because it has less force.
No, much bigger. It means that the exit wound is about the size of a grapefruit. Okay, the entrance wound is the size of a nickel. The exit wound is the size of a grapefruit. Okay, these bodies, these men are running towards the Germans, and the bullets are hitting them, and their bodies are literally exploding. These machine guns are putting hundreds and hundreds of bullets in the air every second. The Germans are going through something like 30,000 rounds of ammunition in like 5 minutes. Okay? The French don't even know what hit them. The bullets are hitting them so bad. If you picture this, you're a soldier and you're running up and you're running towards the Germans, and you know that you got to get there, and you're running, and your buddy in front of you, Pierre, in front of you, he's running in front of you, and he gets shot, and you see him get shot, right? But before his body even hits the ground, his body gets shot again and shot again. Pretty soon, you don't have to step over Pierre's body. Instead, you have to wipe it off your face. This is one way that the war changes, right? As soon as that machine gun comes out, you can't run. I can't run forward. You can't run left. You can't run right. So what do? You dig down. The soldiers fall to the ground and start to dig holes in the ground. It's the invention of trench warfare. When you look at pictures of World War I, the soldiers are almost always sitting in a trench that they've dug out. They're hiding in a trench like this, where they're sitting in this trench where they dug down. It's the only way to hide from the machine guns. If the machine guns weren't scary enough, you have the artillery. Do any of you guys know what artillery means? Okay,
Isn't that like mortars?
Yeah, it could be mortar. Why don't you guys keep your microphones off so you can speak like a normal class, unless it's like loud, right? Unless you're like in a loud situation, right? But let's just speak like a normal class. It'll be better, right? But yeah, Sam says it's like mortar. Mortar is like one type of artillery, right? Artillery are like big guns that shoot long distances, okay? And when I say long distances, I mean like miles and miles. Okay, in World War I, the biggest gun is a German gun, and it shoots about 12 miles away. 12 miles.
Wow.
You can't even see it. You can't even see it. And these shells that are hitting the ground are shells the size of like a garbage can, right? So the shell is like this big around, right, in diameter, and about the size of a garbage can. And it hits the ground and it blows up everything in like a 15-foot radius around it. Okay, that means 30 feet wide. There's like a 30-foot explosion, and the explosion is vertical too, right? It's like a sphere. And so it's blowing up 15 feet worth of dirt. And then that dirt flies up in the air, and then the next shell hits down and blows up another 15 feet worth of dirt, and then another 15 feet worth of dirt, right? We get situations where the soldiers are trying to run away, and they're running, and the dirt is like landing, but the dirt hasn't packed yet. It hasn't packed down yet. And so they run thinking that it's going to be solid, and they just sink right into the dirt. We get a situation where the shells hit the dirt, and the dirt is so soft that the shell just slows down and doesn't even explode. It just sits there and then gets buried with tons of dirt that's falling down from the sky. The last person to die in World War I is a little girl in 2011, when one of these World War I shells that was buried in the dirt had worked its way up to the surface because of water erosion. And the little girl in her farm didn't know what it was. And so she and one of her friends were throwing rocks at it. And they threw a rock that just hit it just a little bit too good. And the shell blew up and killed the little girl. She gets counted. The French count her in the registry as a victim of World War I. She's the last victim of World War I so far, right? But the French have regularly had at least one or two people died every year for decades and decades and decades and decades. All the way until the 90s, it was one or two people a year. Yeah. So trench warfare, artillery, machine guns, barbed wire is even more insidious. Because as you run around no man's land, you run between the trenches and you're trying to get there, people strung barbed wire across the land and you're running at your full speed. You've got machine guns, you've got artillery, and you're running and you're running and you're running. And then you hit a barbed wire and it hits your leg and it rips into your flesh. It tears into your flesh as your legs get tangled up in the wire and you're hanging on this barbed wire with the wire logged into your legs, which means that you're a sitting target. The machine gun hits you and your body just explodes. It's like putting a firecracker inside of a Ziploc bag full of spaghetti.
That's an interesting metaphor.
Pretty gross, huh?
Yep.
The war starts to look like this. There's no heroes in the war. The war takes another turn. The Battle of Loos in 1915 is the first use of poison gas. We call it mustard gas. Mustard gas because it's yellow. It's not made out of mustard seeds. It doesn't smell like mustard. It's just because it's yellow. The photographer here is the first person to take a picture of a chemical warfare attack. He didn't know what it was. He took a picture of the yellow fog. He didn't know what it was, and then he breathed it in and died. Right? There's nothing heroic about breathing and dying. They just start releasing clouds of poisonous gas. The Germans had invented this industry. They invented chemistry. They invent chemistry, the whole discipline of chemistry, and they created all sorts of industrial chemicals, and these industrial chemicals kill people, right? And the Germans thought, we can turn this into a weapon. Now, if you understand how chemical weapons work, when you breathe, the inside of your lungs has all the cells on the inside of your lung, and you have little cilia sticking on the edges of your cells, right? You guys know what cilia is, right? It's like a little protein strands, essentially, right? And the little cilia, these little protein strands on the edges of your cells, they like basically function like kind of like seaweed, kind of, right? Where they grab little molecules of air and they pull it into the cell. And they pull it into the cell, right? Like this, right? Well, with a chemical weapon, you breathe it in and the cilia can't tell the difference between the chlorine molecule and the air molecule. And so it grabs the chlorine and pulls it in. And then what happens is once the chlorine is inside of your cells, it reacts with the cytoplasm in your cell. What's cytoplasm in your cell? You know what that is?
I don't know.
I know.
Jacob, you remember?
No, I don't.
No, we can't hear you very well.
Well.
All right, so cytoplasm is the goo in the middle of your cell, right? It's the white part of an egg when you crack the egg open, right? And so it's the gooey part. It turns that cytoplasm into clay. It turns it into really hard like clay. All right, hard like clay. And so what happens is you breathe in and then your lungs get stuck there. They turn into the surface of your lungs become hard like dry clay, basically. And then you never exhale again because you can't move your lungs, you can't breathe, and then you die. Industry wins wars. Industry creates the bullets. Industry creates 40,000 bullets in 5 minutes. Industry creates chlorine gas. Industry wins wars. The war starts looking like this. This is soldiers on a day off, playing some soccer on a day off. What country is this?
I don't know. It just looks like a normal hill.
You can't tell. You can't tell what country the soldiers are from because everyone looks the same. Once the war gets started, everyone looks the same, right? The war is anonymous. Not only are we looking the same, but we have masks over our heads. We can't even see who each other are. World War I also starts to take a really dark turn. This is where we're going to start getting our first genocides. The Austrians try to commit genocide against the Serbians. The Ottomans try to commit genocide against the Armenians. We're going to start getting genocides. We think of genocide in World War II, like with the Holocaust, and we should, right? But let's not forget that it starts earlier. There's some dogs with masks. Use the dogs because the dogs can sniff out bombs. And so you when there's no gas around, you let the dog off and he can go find the bombs. That way you can dig them up so they don't just blow up on you when you're walking to the bathroom sometime. The war starts to look very, very different. This is also the first war where we get vertical wars. We get wars that go up to the planes, and we also get wars that go down to submarines. Planes start doing the first aerial bombardments, and these planes have just barely been invented. These planes are made out of wood, right? They're so light that like 3 men can carry them. You get one man picks up the tail, and then one person picks up the wing and the other wing, right? And then they carry the plane, and they will carry it out onto the field, and then they start the engine up, right? The engine is about the size of like a riding lawnmower. We get our first airplane war. This is where we're going to get our first tanks also. I like this picture over here. You can barely even see the soldiers. They look like mud, right? It looks like rocks and mud. Heroes don't win wars anymore. Industry wins wars. Here's some of the first tanks. The German one here with the skull on it. The Germans like to put skulls on things. The Brits are the other one. This is probably the most famous picture in the entire war. This picture is called Over the Top. And these are French soldiers trying to cross the no man's land to go attack the Germans. He's getting shot. Here's a submarine. We got our first submarines. Okay. The war also gets our first absorbent cotton bandages. That's on your list of technologies, right? Which helps to stop some of the wounds, right? The absorbent cotton bandages, the nurses in the medical tents, the nurses realized that these absorbent cotton bandages would have a really, really good other effect. The other effect is sanitary napkins. They invent pads, like menstrual pads, for women to wear, in their underwear when they're having their period. For the very first time in human history, women are going to be able to control their periods, right? It's something that boys don't ever think about in class, but it's something that girls think about quite often. But it's something that matters, right? At any given time, 7% of the planet Earth is menstruating. 7% of the planet Earth is on their period at any time. At any time. It's kind of weird to think about, right? And to think that many people on the planet didn't have that. All right, let's go to big number F. F is the United States enters the war. Now the Europeans are going to continue fighting for quite a while. The Europeans are going to fight for like 4 years before the US even joins them. The US does not want anything to do with Europe. We are staying away with a 10-foot pole. We don't want anything to do with it. The US enters the war in 1916. And the reason why is that we're going to give you a couple of reasons. Reason number one, Germans are sinking American ships. Germans are sinking American ships. The German submarines have just been destroying all the ships they can find. Americans are like, don't sink us, we're neutral. And the Germans are like, hell no, you're not neutral. You're giving supplies to the French and you're giving supplies to the Brits. That's not neutral, right? The Americans, we keep trying to claim neutral and the Germans keep saying no. And so the Germans just start sinking our ships. The worst one is the Lusitania. The Lusitania is the name of one of the ships that the Germans sinks. It's actually a British ship, but it was filled with about 400 Americans. And so they sunk the ship, it's filled with 400 civilians. They sunk the ship, and this really, really angers Americans a lot. Americans are really, really upset about this. Reason number two is something called the Zimmerman telegram. Zimmerman is the name of the foreign minister of Germany, like Secretary of State, the German equivalent of a Secretary of State. All right, Fernanda, can you read our telegram for us?
Sure. We intend to begin on the 1st of February unrestricted submarine warfare. We shall endeavor in spite of all in spite of this, to keep the United States of America neutral. In the event of this not succeeding, we make Mexico a proposal of alliance on the following basis. Make war together, make peace together, general financial support, and understanding on our part that Mexico is to reconquer the lost territory in Texas, New Mexico, and Arizona. The settlement in detail is left to you. You will inform the president of the above note secretly as soon as the outbreak of war with the United States of America is certain, and add the suggestions that he should, on this his own initiative, Japan
Invite.
to immediate.
That says
to
invite Japan.
Okay. Invite Japan to immediate adherence, and at the same time mediate between Japan and ourselves. Please call the president's attention to the fact that the ruthless employment of our submarine now offers to, I can't see the word.
Offers the prospect of compelling England.
England in a few months to make peace. Signed, Zimmerman.
Yeah. The Germans send this message to the Mexicans. So Germany sends a message to Mexico, and it's trying to get Mexico to join the war. It's asking Mexico to join the war against the United States. And what does he say? What did the Germans say Mexico is going to get if they join?
Their lost territory, or the states that they lost.
Yeah. All of those states that the United States took from Mexico, Germany's like, we'll give them back to you. They'll be yours again. Texas, New Mexico, Arizona. Now, what do you think Americans are going to find out here? How do you think Americans are going to feel when we find out that Germany is trying to turn our neighbor against us?
They're going to be really mad.
Super, super pissed off. The United States is really, really angry. At this point in time, we do not have a very good relationship with Mexico anyway, right? And we don't have a very good relationship with Mexico anyway. And now it's, even in more danger because of this. Yeah, America is super pissed. The Mexicans don't take the deal. The Mexicans are like, oh, no, hell no, no. We don't want anything to do with this, right? The Mexicans are like, we do not want to fight the United States. We're going to lose. That sounds like a terrible idea, right? So the Mexicans turn it down, but the Americans are really pissed to the Americans for the war. The reason number one, the Germans are sinking our ships. Reason number two, the Germans were trying to get the Mexicans to fight against us, the Zimmerman telegram. Reason number three is Russia is collapsing. Russia's starting to collapse. We don't know this at the time, but Russia's about to overthrow its government. It's about to have the Bolshevik Revolution. Number two, Jacob. Number two is the Zimmerman telegram. That's the Zimmerman telegram where Germany was trying to turn Mexico against us. Okay. Reason number three, Russia's collapsing. Russia has the Bolshevik Revolution, and this is where the Russians are going to stop being Russia, and they're going to start to become the Soviet Union. This is where communists take over, and they kill the Tsar, and they kill the royal family, and they take over the government. As soon as they do this, the October Revolution, it happens in November of 1917. We call it the October Revolution. Russians used a different calendar, so they had a different day for October. But The October Revolution results in communists taking over Russia. And as soon as that happens, Russia withdraws from the war. Okay. We go into more detail when I teach European history, but you can just know that after this, Russia goes into a civil war. They get out of World War I and they go into a civil war. And in that civil war is going to last all the way till 1922. And the Russians are going to kill another 10 million of their own people in that war on top of World War I. And then that civil war is also going to cause a famine in Russia, which is going to kill another 6 million people. Right? Russia's going to end up losing almost 30 million people in less than 10 years. Okay, we're going to stop here. Next class, we're going to end the war. We'll sign the Treaty of Versailles and we're going to end the war. Okay? Do we have, I'm stopping the recording now.